Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Class of '09, Season 1, Episode 2. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. This episode specifically focuses on mainly Teo, obviously past, present, and future. And let's start off with the past. Obviously, there's a fitness side to this whole situation. Obviously, there's a certain time limit that the guys have to hit versus there's a certain time limit that the women have to hit. And obviously, Teo is the only one in the class that doesn't hit the necessary time limit. His time limit ends up being kind of around the same time as because the women's time limit is like 14 minutes and the guys just like 12 and in at 12 minutes and 40 some seconds or something like that. So, which is impressive. I would not be able to do it. I already know that. I'm not a physically fit person, obviously. But either way, was it Simmons? Is that the dude's name? The dude that gives Teo so much grief because he's just talking. Well, because Teo gets another shot at it, but no one, not even Aura, which that's how you pronounce the name. I wasn't sure last episode, but yes, it's pronounced Or. She doesn't believe Teo would be able to do it because he has 5 days to because yes, he initially passed I guess there's a fitness test you have to kind of get through, but he already he did a self test, and so he was able to skirt things a little bit. He says right, I was working basically an insurance job, so I didn't really have to be active, so I let my body go. It's kind of his thing. Maybe he just was able to skirt things because he was able to take the test himself, but either way, he has to pass the test this time or it's a no-go. And this one guy is giving him a lot of grief about it, so he doesn't think Teo will make it, especially because they're you has 5 days. There's no way, nothing's going to change in that time frame. Which obviously for Teo, he's I know people like you, and he's hey, I'm not a bully. I'm just stating it as it is. You're not cut out for this, which is funny because I don't know if that dude's part of the class or not. If we go back to the class photos from last episode, because that guy might be around me. We don't know where his future is. Funny enough, we know where Teo's future is with the FBI in 25 years, but we don't know if maybe he didn't make it out of the class. Maybe we only get him in the present day in 2023, which we'll talk about that later. So we don't know that person's future. Like I said, they could have been cut from the class in 2009 for all we know. But Poet decides hey, I'm going to help you out. And I think it's so interesting where he's later on he talks to her. He's well, I see you standing there worrying about me, but what you don't see is me standing here worrying about you. Because Aura's got that same perspective where she sees Poet as a fixer. And maybe this could have something to do with her being a nurse. That is in you to want to help people, want to fix people. But that's how Aura sees it, because it's hey, you're willing to loan me money just so that I'd have a uniform. I didn't really talk about that last episode, but that, now you're taking Teo. For her, it's you're finding all these people that you can fix and help, and it's that's your thing, which I described last episode. Everyone in the group seems to have their own thing, and Aura was pointing that out. And it's right, if I were to leave, you wouldn't let me. And Poe was no, I wouldn't stop you this time. If you want to go, then go. I won't stop you this time. And it's wait, was that our first fight? It's yeah, it was. Will it be our last? And Poet's no, it probably won't, because we'll probably butt heads. And obviously where they stand in the future, things are pretty rough, but we'll get to that soon enough. I even love later on the dude that, once again, that Teo is beefing with. That guy was making a whole point about how, because he took, trying to get, the fastest, record in a certain dash measurement, and it's, 32 point something seconds, and he missed it from, one, and, it was, a fraction of seconds. He ended up, or a fraction of a second he missed it, or whatever, point something seconds he ended up missing it. And then it's oh my god, the second fastest person in, FBI history or whatever, and what's his remark? That means it makes me the fastest white guy, because the guy who has the record is a guy named Mitch who's black. And Teo took offense to that. He was no, go ahead, say what you want to say. He's oh, it's not even like that. It's if it wasn't like that, you wouldn't have opened your stupid mouth in the first place. You wouldn't have said something even if you want to, you can think that, but it's something that Teo constantly says. He's you revealed yourself. Because for him, it's I have a certain view of the world now. And for him, it's about, he sees things and sees people for who they really are. And for him, it's there's even a connection with Poet in that regard, because what happened? her fiance revealed himself when he made the thing of like, oh yeah, like I'm not going to transfer. I'm not willing to transfer to a different place, like relocate for my fiance because she wants to join the FBI because I didn't really believe in her. So I think maybe a little bit of that is why Poet and Teo kind of connected immediately. So oh, I'm glad to be in the same class as you. So am I. And like the reason why she wants, like there's something there. There is a parallel that has being created between both of these characters and their journeys, like the different paths they took, the connections they have, the differences they have, the similarities. It's really interesting, and it feels like they're going to be our main through line of where they started to where they ended up in their journey there and everything that happened to influence them. And we really get into that a lot this episode of Teo. So, but later on, Poet talks to Teo because Gabriel got on them about the fact is that like right, you either kind of rise together or you all fall together. You either make it like this. I don't care if the FBI's already spent $100,000 on you. We will fail you right here and now. Like if this keeps up, the fact is you either rise together or you fall together. That's just you all pass or you none of you do. So it's kind of like you kind of work together. It's kind of like your weakest link. It's kind of that strength. You're only as strong as your weakest link type of situation. But Teo talks to Poet about it later on about like, right, she's never been arrested, but he has. He was like, I was 15 years old. We were on our way to a movie. I was in the back seat reading a book. It was like my brother and maybe like his friend or something. Cops pulled them over. They did what they're supposed to do. They are compliant and compliant in the way of when you're black, you have to move a certain way. And I think there's a lot of, I think it's a conversation that happens a lot with the black community, but I think it is also a conversation that a lot of minorities have to. I feel like I don't hear it as much of from every other community. I hear it the most from the black community, but I don't know if that is something that other communities have that conversation too. But it's a very prominent conversation of when you run into the cops, you say, yes, sir, no, sir, you be as compliant as possible. But they were asked to get out the car and everything, despite everything. It's like, hey, we were just on the way to a movie, nothing, yada, yada, yada. But the cops like made him get out and stuff like that. The others started fighting back, like pushing back. You know, it turned into like a lawyer debate. Like they were like, hey, like, you know, it becomes that right thing of like, wait, we didn't do anything wrong. You have no right to treat us like this. Went over to a young 15-year-old Teo. He was quiet, didn't say anything. I thought the story was going to go to like, my view of it was going to be like, this is, let's call a spade a spade. I thought it was going to be a situation where it's like, see, this kid has it right. You're supposed to be quiet and follow that. When we tell you something, you know, it's that combination of the wrong person in the wrong job with the wrong position. This is these are shitty people who have power, who are, you know, now it's like you have the power to kind of dictate some stuff. It's like you're power tripping. You're also being racist. But I thought it was going to be like look at this. This is how you're supposed to be. Like, I thought that was going to be the shit of like, yeah, like this boy has it right. And I do mean boy in the racist connotation in this regard. I don't mean just because he's like a 15-year-old. I mean legitimately, I could see them saying like boy because in a racist connotation. But yeah, what did they do? They slapped him because it was supposed to show, once again, power trip and also like, hey, we're the ones with power in this situation, not you. And the others kept quiet. And for Teo, it's like that to him was an eye-opening circumstance. It made him see the world for what it really is. Because she, you know, Poet was like, I'm sorry that happened to you. He's like, I'm not. That moment revealed the world to me, how things really are. And for him, it's like, I see the world for the way it really is. I'm afraid, I worry that you don't. Now, I don't know whether that's supposed to represent the fact is that because Poet comes from this, I don't know whether he's saying that from the perspective of you feel like everything can be fixed and everything is okay, that the world is okay enough that everyone can be okay. And it's like, it's not. There are things, there are just always going to be some things and some people that will just stack the odds against you. Things are kind of like, there are systems that can systematically be meant to keep you down, to keep you in place. So I don't know whether he's just saying from the point of view of Poet's got a naive perspective on the world, like you want to look at things from an optimistic view, but you are coming at it from a naive perspective where I am coming from it from a very realistic standpoint. I don't fully know if that's kind of what they were aiming at in that regard, but when it's all said and done, the next, thing happens, and so the next race, fitness test happens, and The guy's trying to apologize. He's like, hey, I'm sorry. He's like, are you really trying to apologize, or are you just trying to say goodbye to me? They do their thing. He did improve his time. His time last time was like 14 minutes. This time it's like, wasn't it like 13 minutes and 2 seconds or something like that? He heavily increased. Like, the fact is he was able to do that is, in my opinion, very impressive. Like, that was like, he knocked almost an entire minute off his time. You know, and they were like, yeah, that was in 5 days. And for him, it's like, right, because of the manual, he looked at it like he is allowed to take the test again in 7 weeks. So Drew and Gabriel give him the okay, so he can do it again. So, and that's where we kind of see him kind of going off, and we know it eventually works out, considering he's still with the FBI. So that's everything in the past. He's, well, not everything, because we do end with him like talking to his mom, being like, yeah, everything's fine, Mom. It's not like school. Like, I guess he got, you know, especially the conversation he had with home dude. Like I said, I think dude's name was Simmons, but maybe I'm misremembering. But it's like, yeah, the dude he had beef with. It's like, at the end of the day, like, you could tell, like, he was someone that was bullied a lot. And I think, like, just not in school, but probably just life in general, you know? Probably had it rough. You know, it's probably like being black, but also being the thick boy. Like, you know, that doesn't help either. So, but he's trying to assure his mom's like, nah, it's okay. It's nothing like school, Mom. It's nothing, you know? I mean, I didn't even talk about it, but like that line, that was the most heartbreaking line to hear from Teo, was like, my dad never hit me, God rest his soul, my mom never hit me. Until that cop slapped him at 15, he had never been hit by anyone ever in his life. And it's like, Jesus, that's the effed up thing, that it's like, that was literally a physical and metaphorical representation of that's life for you. Life will bitch slap you out of nowhere. So I just thought that was just interesting. Of like, yeah, that was kind of his wake up moment. And everyone, I guess, in some shape or form, it manifests itself differently. But I guess that was his realization about the world and kind of his place in it and how the world would view him. At least some of the world. But for him, it's like, it's kind of a greater conversation, because you can probably divide it up that not everyone in the world is obviously going to be like that, power trippy and racist in that regard. But it is a thing of, it's a revelation about the world and the systems that are in place, like I was kind of talking about before. Present day, we have Teo with a new agent, Nunes. She was trying to go to Miami, but he's like, yeah, they always send people. They try to send people to new FBI agents to like new places, you know, people with like no loyalties, no family, no friends. So it's just a thing of, they need those kind of people that they can kind of slide in anywhere. So they probably specifically choose agents of that caliber who kind of have no ties at all to anywhere out there and they need them to be. They're investigating this guy who's played by Mark, is it Pellegrino? Obviously, my first introduction to him was obviously Lucifer in Supernatural. But when it's all said and done, they're there to investigate. And I was kind of getting a weird culty vibe from this place, because apparently they had been questioned before and nothing had come about. But Teo wanted to go out there because he's like, hey, like, our presence is provocative, so there's a lot we can end up revealing about them by going. So one of the things they immediately notice is like one of the guys that's handing Teo tea has a slit in his arm, and so it becomes this conversation of the guy. I think it's the character's name is Mark too. He's like, yo, at the end of the day, this is called like the suicide belt, because there's so many farmers that are out on their own and kind of left to their own devices that it's like, I think it's supposed to almost be, how I interpret that as kind of like a middle America thing. This is where we get political. I'm not trying to put everyone in that box, but it is the thing of like, that's why Trump speaks to so many people, because it's supposed to be like, you can make the argument like, I don't know if this is like the legitimate breakdown, but you could say like a lot of Trump's base is maybe middle America, which they feel like other politicians don't speak for them. It's like, this is the guy who's actually speaking for me. He kind of says what he wants, so it kind of can be appealing. Like, I'm not trying to argue like everything, like not attributing all the shitty things that Trump does and says. That's one thing. That's not a representation of everyone. Like, I'm not trying to put like middle America into that regard, but it is a group that feels like they're not represented. It kind of like the very like blue collar workers, like the farmers and stuff. That's why Trump spoke to them, because they're like, this is the first politician who feels like you're speaking to me. You're talking about my struggles, where it just feels like every other politician you're talking about everywhere else but us. You're not talking about what we're going through. And so that's where Mark kind of comes into play. He feels that void too, where it's like, these are farmers who like it's 6 times more suicide here than homicide, because of like how spread out everyone is, how alone everyone is, because they feel like they're being forgotten, they're not being heard, they're feeling disenfranchised. So he's like, hey, you come here, you can kind of feel welcome. So, and that's why I don't want to fool it. Well, I think there's parallels you can make on how Trump can weaponize people that you can't. I mean, and it's not just Trump. This isn't just a Trump thing. This is anyone with power and position. I mean, once again, that's very cult-like behavior too, of like, what's a cult able to do? Rile your people up, your base, the people that you, who you feel like who feel like you speak for them, you understand them. We don't, it's like these are people who are low, and what does a cult leader do? They take advantage of that. They see the weaknesses in you, which isn't like a fault of your own. It's just like when you're down and out, they take advantage of you in those moments. And so that's what this Mark guy was doing. His wife, Jessime, I got weird vibes from that. I'm like, because the moment she got introduced, I was like, and she's super quiet. She's not saying anything. She's just there to kind of be like the wife of like, yeah, this is my wife. I'm like, is this a sex trafficking thing or something? Like that, I immediately got nervous. She takes Nunes to a specific room when Nunes was like, oh, I want to go to the bathroom or whatever. And so they check it out, the basement, and it has all this stuff about the FBI. In particular, hey, here's Teo Michaels, his wife, even the new agent that got assigned to him, Nunes. So it's like, they must have someone on the inside of the FBI, or maybe they just have someone that's able to hack into those systems. Like, how do you have information like that? It seemed like Nunes was fairly new, and you already had that on a board, and they have like all this information. They even try to figure out like, oh, is this where Teo's like upbringing was? Like, did he grow up in this neighborhood? Like, they are going deep. And you're like, what? I was like, what the hell is this? Especially when he was talking to Teo and he was like, yo, did you know like certain guy? He made some reference to like FBI agents kind of being sent to like very specific like sections, like Billings or whatever. And at first, like Teo's like, you know an awful lot about the FBI. And it's like, okay. So I was like, are we dealing with a domestic terrorist group? And yes, we are. A militia / it's like anti probably government militia group that is, once again, as I already said it, there's no point in mincing words. They're domestic terrorists. So they have an issue with the way the government kind of runs. It's probably like, this is kind of our sovereign land. We don't recognize the FBI. We don't recognize the government's laws and stuff type of situation. It's like, definitely gave off that energy, and it seems like that is the case. So ultimately, Teo and Nunes were about to leave, and Nunes was like, I got to tell you what I saw. He was like, not here. And before they were able to leave, Jessime comes outside, and Nunes, she's trying to hand Nunes some. I don't know whether like they left her out there trying to like, they wanted to set this up. Maybe the point was like either to make a point, or I don't know. Or maybe Jessime just didn't see it coming. Probably didn't, because they're like, no, go out there, honey. Put a bullet in her. Because they're like, oh, you're a traitor. You did something. You sold us out. Like, just might have had some feeling. But either way, or maybe it was to get, maybe she was meant to show Nunes all of that. Maybe that was on purpose, and then she was just a sacrificial lamb. Whatever the case may be, put a bullet in her chest. Luckily, it didn't go through her and hit Nunes, because she ends up later on getting shot in the leg, and it turns into a firefight. Nunes is in pretty bad condition. I was kind of scared, especially when they were shooting at the truck, and it was like hitting the glass in the back, because she's behind the vehicle, like where the trunk is. I was so scared that she might catch a bullet like that, but luckily she survived, and Teo was like taking people out. He tried to make his way back to the building to check out the basement, but it was already on fire, because it's like, right, they had already gotten out. The only people left were meant to either kill them or hold them off enough, because they are all about this cause, so we're willing to sacrifice ourselves, but also burn the place down so that none of what they have planned could be trailed back to him. So by the time Teo got back in there, it was already on fire. He caught enough to see his picture and his wife, and they're like, okay. And he also saw like the FBI billings and stuff like that. It's like, okay, what Mark had just talked about. It's like they've got some plan in play. So who knows what Nunes' future is? It's like, oh, is she going to be okay? And Mateo doesn't say anything when his wife says that, because she's like, it's not your fault. It went down this way. But it is a thing of he insisted on coming out here, especially he insisted on coming out here alone. You didn't have any backup. That was like, we already had an inkling about these people. He already did. But for him, it's like, at the end of the day, it was worth it because they revealed themselves. But it's like, but Nunez has that perspective of, did we stop something today or did we start it? I think regardless of it all, it was always going to be a thing, obviously, but the argument could be everything got expedited if, like, maybe if Teo hadn't handled things the way he did, they eventually could have built up enough evidence to cut them off at the pass beforehand, or maybe it's the push they needed. Not saying like it's a good thing, obviously in a shitty way, that it was a push they needed to decide like, no, we got to do it now, like, because they already like popped off on Teo and Nunez. I don't know if that was a situation of like she's never going to walk again, like she might be paralyzed type of thing, or maybe she can never go back out in the field type of thing. I don't know, like it felt like her situation's pretty bad. I don't know. But it's like, who are they going after? And Teo's like, us. And that ties into the future stuff, because we see that Poet came and visited Lennox, and he was talking in front of a building about there was an attack. So it's like, yeah, 44 agents die. So I'm assuming it's probably like it all happened at that point, because it's 2034 in the future. So it was like 11 years ago. So that attack probably happened pretty quickly, because we see them already lining up. Like, the fact is, in present day, we saw Mark have like a layout of the FBI building, so it is an attack. And once again, we don't know how many of those agents that might have been part of class of 09 might have died in that, because we know, obviously we know Murphy's still alive, and we know Aura is still alive, because Lennox was like, yo, you need to talk to her. Like, when was the last time you like spoke to her? And it's like, they haven't talked in 9 years. So it's been 11 years. So a good chunk of that has to be connected to Lennox, putting her in that position where she has to kind of spy on Aura. So maybe that kind of played a role. And then I figured it would. Once again, we don't know what their history is, whether or not anything ever happened between them in between 09 and 23, or 23 to 2034. Like, maybe something did happen, but then like 2 years into it, it's like, wait, you were sent to spy on me, and that like burned that bridge completely to the point they didn't speak for the next 9 years. So that's where my mindset is at. But because Lennox isn't with the FBI anymore. In fact, he retired. He was actually going to teach at Quantico, but he says, like, they basically changed how the FBI Academy works. Rather than it being the 5-month thing that it originally was, it's now 5 weeks. You got to get them in and get them out. They don't even know have to learn how to drive. They're trying to learn the basic stuff, so like guns and stuff like that, because the recruitment is on the decline. So they need to try and get as many like new recruits into the FBI as possible. So like the standards are kind of going down, even to the point that Lennox was saying, like, our class would never be able to exist this day, maybe because it's like they needed that time to grow into the FBI agents. Like, Drew and Gabriel pushing them all forged them into the diamonds that they became. Because I didn't talk about it, but Gabriel had said, like, he had made some okay classes, a few good classes, but he's never had an exceptional class. It feels like 09 is going to be that exceptional class, especially where everyone ended up. But he, interestingly enough, is kind of going down the same route at his parents. Like, he, wanted to pull away from the lawyer stuff. His family was actually hoping that this FBI stuff would eventually, like, hey, with this under your resume and under your belt, makes it easier to kind of have the whole, like, political career. And it kind of worked out in the end, because now he is going into politics. But like the bureau's not the same as it was. Even Poet feels the same way. I don't know if that's like she is. No, because she showed up with Murphy, so she is still FBI, but it's not the FBI that she's come to know for these past 25 years. She's like, I've given the FBI all of my life, and it's just like, it's not the same bureau I signed up for. It's not what I thought it would be in the end. So, but the key card she got from Amos. It's like, yeah, you got to talk to Aura about that. She was always the one that was all about the code and stuff like that. So we're going to be connecting those bridges and everything next episode, I'm sure, in that regard. But we also catch up with Teo. This is after his meeting with like the Senate and stuff like that about wanting to extend his position as head of the FBI for like another 5 years. And she talks about, once again, the very Minority Report system that he has, where like people are getting arrested for something that they didn't do yet. They might have thought about, but that doesn't, because that's not probably, it's the machine probably, like the system probably does account for human behavior, but people are so complicated. There's so much that maybe you can break down the human behavior. That's the scary thing about AI being able to kind of break everything down. I mean, we're obviously, it's very poignant time too, especially in the development of machine learning and everything like that, where we have like this artificial stuff. It's not quite artificial intelligence, but it's on the cusp of that, even present day. So to kind of that conversation escalated even more then. I mean, once again, this is a prominent conversation that's been happening for a while. Once again, using Minority Report, for example, because that's what it legitimately is. But like the senator was like, the son of a friend of mine got arrested and none of us can find out why. It had to be for something he didn't do yet. And it's like, yeah, but maybe that friend of yours, didn't know their son as well as they thought they did. Because I believe the attack all those years ago, 11 years ago, once again, I'm still pushing it like it has to be a 2023 attack. That attack shifted everything for Teo because he'd already had his perspective on things, and I think that attack revealed so much about the world and maybe even about himself that he shifted into his position, because for him it's like people fail. We can't count on people because people were supposed to do their jobs. People were supposed to do their thing back then and they failed. Or we're going to leave it up to a machine that won't make that mistake. We're going to cut this off from the past so another tragedy like that never happens again. Like nothing terrible like that will ever happen again. We'll never get caught with our pants down like that again. We'll kind of cut this off of like, we're going to make this, obviously it's like, this is one of the greatest countries, the safest country ever, but it kind of leads down such a scary road when you are leaving it up to technology to kind of like, ascertain that this person's most likely to do something. Does that, if you're able to kind of arrest people for something they think about, some people have intrusive thoughts, but it's probably like, hey, this behavior, their circumstances. The point is like everyone's supposed to be viewed the same. Poor, rich, whatever your circumstances are, all of this system's supposed to look at everyone in the same view. Is kind of how Teo put it last episode. But he kind of gave this analogy where he talked about folklore. He's like 500 years ago, there was a rabbi who couldn't count on people to protect the Jewish people. So what did he do? He made a golem out of clay. That is like, if people weren't able to protect, this golem would be that. So that's what this is supposed to represent, where people can't be counted on to protect other people. I have a system that is in place that will, kind of showing like this is, because I guess it's that hard thing of like, right, I have this vision of how the world can be better, just no one else is willing. They want to nitpick this and that, but how can you argue with the results? Because you want to argue with the results because of the, God, what would be the word I'm looking for? The negative side of it, you feel like, because I think in Teo's mind, it's kind of a small price to pay, because it's like, who knows, like, yeah, you might be arresting someone for something they didn't do, but who's to say, left alone, that person, circumstances in life will not shift them into the monsters the monsters of tomorrow. The normal people of today could easily become the monsters of tomorrow if left to their own devices and circumstances. And once again, I guess this system kind of puts that and considers all that at play when deciding. So, but once again, you're putting it all up to a system to decide, but it's like, because humans have failed in the past, like how can we count on humans like doing their job when they have failed time and time and time and time again? And it's just, it's done. I'm going to shift this into something else because the good in his mind outweighs any negative, because maybe in his mind there is no negative, because those negatives could easily have been even worse negatives in the future. So for him, it kind of nets positive fully. But we'll have to ultimately wait to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode to kind of really see how that all shakes out. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.